Hi everyone, I'm Russell Dalgleish. I'm chairman of Scottish Business Network. That's Scotland's global diaspora network. Our goal is to bring together Scots around the world to help Scotland. A very simple mission. But I have a keen interest in technology, and I'm delighted to be here today with Heine Krog Iversen from TimeXtender, who's joining us from, I believe, Seattle. Is that correct, Heine?
That's correct, Russell. So good afternoon to the Scottish people. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, it's great to have you with us. And if I could just start by just hearing a little bit about your own journey. So I think if you explained to me, you're a Dane by birth, but now in America. So what was the journey that took you there?
Well, I think, I've always been, in my entire career focusing on how to automate whatever workload that a company had. And at some point 15 years ago, we decided that why should it be so complicated to get management information? This was way before the cloud. We have to remember, this was when everything was with your own data centers, with the own, the truckloads of servers that were coming in, and everything took a little longer than it does today. But still, it was difficult, right? And running an ERP consulting company at that time, it was very difficult to understand that we could get the most advanced warehouse systems up and running. Production was working with lean principles. And then when it came to the executive team wanted to have information, it was like they were making decisions in the dark, right? There was still a lot of this management by walking around that worked back in those days. So we started our journey to solve that, and as also the technology around us evolved, we got cloud computing, and as we had to make a decision as a small startup, you can't solve everything on the planet at once, right? So we made a decision early on when it was on-prem that we would do this and help customers who wanted to use the Microsoft technologies. So that was kind of where we come from. And when we moved to the cloud, of course, the natural first step was continue to work with Microsoft. And that's actually how in my journey that I ended up in the Seattle area, because we became one of the very close managed partners to Microsoft, 2 times runner-up for World Partner Achievement. So when we had to enhance our relationship and grow into the US market, this just was the natural place. And then I must say, and I know that everybody in Scotland will appreciate that we all like summer and sun, but Seattle is like Scotland and Scandinavia. It's with seasons, and it's wonderfully green and slightly wet.
Oh, Seattle's a wonderful place to be based, and it makes so much sense to take a startup to be based close to Microsoft as well, because that will allow you so many advantages around building relationships.
Yes, and I would actually say pre-COVID, it made much more sense than it does today, because what have happened. So we relocated full-time 2 or 3 years ago with the family, living outside Seattle today. But when we came back after the lockdown, Microsoft employees have moved all over the place. So it's changing rapidly right now. We use, like today, we use video and voice and new ways to communicate. And I actually do think that in the future, it might be less important to live close to strategic partners or strategic areas, because we all are thinking differently now.
I completely agree with you. I think the physical base of where we are in the world may matter less and less as technology continues to support us in this way, and allows us to reach out globally to do conversations that we could never have contemplated doing before. So I think we will see some benefits coming out of this terrible period we've had over the last 18 months. But there's something that really intrigues me about TimeXtender. You have a very clear ethos about trying to help your customers save time and return time to them, because of the nature of time being the most valuable resource in our society. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because it's a wonderful image and a wonderful why behind the company.
Absolutely, be happy to. I think the most important thing we have, all of us, regardless of what we do, is time. Time is actually the only thing that we cannot buy, right? So you can be as successful as some are. I mean, I can, 20 miles from here, we have the two of the three richest people on the planet is living just at Medina outside Bellevue. But regardless of how many billions and hundreds of billions of dollars that they have managed successfully to make, they cannot stretch the clock to more than 24 hours. And I think they cannot even predict how long they will be on this planet. And our journey have had ups and downs, and of course there's always incidents that help shape your view, and we are very open that in our story that my technical co-founder passed away in 2013, January 27th at 4 p.m. With a heart attack next to me in a bar in South Africa. So we just arrived. He was 42 years old, very sad story, but it also shows how vulnerable life is and how important it is to focus on what do I actually spend my time on, right? Because we work a lot, we work hard, everybody, I think, privately and when we go to our job. But we need to make sure that we spend the time wisely. And we need to make sure that we understand that if I have a certain amount of time in my job, if I can get the data, the strategy, and my feeling, so we call it data, mind, and heart, behind everything I'm doing, so data needs to be instantly available, then I can get so much more done with the time I invest into it, right? And for this very specific, the development teams that are building all these data solutions for all the companies, if they could, spend time either go home, go to the soccer game with your kids instead of spending, that extra hour trying to debug some manual code, or if they could spend the time more wisely in enhancing the life of their colleagues or the local community. We have a very strong focus on our SDGs also, but with a very local focus, where we have ex-people and partners, cities, areas, that's where we want to make an impact.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. I can imagine that experience in the bar in South Africa. That must have been just such a life-changing moment.
Absolutely.
And a great way to explain about experiencing that, the importance of time and how much time we have.
I think it sometimes takes that, right? I think sometimes a lot of us, we have, even myself still, we have a tendency that we end up in the hamster wheel. We end up in just being busy. So I actually spend, I would not say half my time as CEO, but a significant amount of my time is actually trying to constantly coach the ex-people, as we call our employees or colleagues, on stop being busy. Stop having notifications, Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I actually think that social media is not only for the good. Because it's also part of helping to stress people, because you're afraid of missing out on anything, so you have all these announcements and it's bing, 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 bing on your phone all the time. It's not good for us. We need to relax. We need to do some deep work, get out of that hamster wheel, and apparently I think that we will spend the rest of our life trying to explain this to people, and hopefully one day we will see just a little improvement.
You are a kindred spirit, Heine. I in all the training courses I run, I talk to people about your telephone, your smartphone has something called flight mode. So when I sit down to lunch, I press on flight mode, right? Yeah. So it stops me bothering on YouTube, but no one can contact me. And when I've finished my lunch and I want to go back to work, I switch off flight mode. And we have wonderful idea.
We do. Whatever brand is all. Yeah, that's a wonderful idea, and I think super important, right?
Yeah, super important because I think this having that as the ethos of the company about trying to enrich our lives through giving us time, helping us to remove some of the tasks. I remember years ago I had a friend who said they had to get up every morning and spend the first hour deleting all the spam in their email. And I sat down with him and I showed him how to use a spam filter. And there's a great feeling about giving him an extra hour every day. And this is such a great ethos. So with the company itself, you have an approach whereby you use local partners, as you mentioned, from this community perspective. Why is having local partners important?
Well, and this is a super interesting discussion because if you look at the majority of what the software companies, the tech world of today is doing, is running everything by Excel spreadsheet. And everything is a formula that is looking at the lower right corner. That's called profit. And then I need to maximize that, and then every other decision needs to somehow lead into that, right? The problem with doing it this way is that if you look at the labor market today also, right, it's stressed. There's not enough people, right? And especially in our industry, finding good skilled people with data knowledge to help on different levels is difficult. But I see it actually as the scalable way of building a global software company. So we are 100% partner. We might be the only one on the planet that is 100%. But I don't believe that you can do both. Sometimes you need to make a decision, and then you need to take the good and the bad with that decision instead of trying constantly to grab the best of all options, because then you get nothing. You get just fruit salad at the end of the day out of that, right? So we take the partner approach because we believe that the best solution for any company is to work with local people who speak the local language, people who actually understand the local culture. You're in Scotland, you're part of UK. I guarantee that your culture in a lot of ways are different from where you are to where Chris is, for instance, in another part of England. Understanding those small differences in how people interact. Where do we go to get coffee in Italy? You might go to the pub to get a pint. All these small things. And then on top of that, working purely with partners, we can work with people who understand specific verticals. So they understand whatever whiskey vertical maybe you have in Scotland, I could imagine. And that's something that we will never be as good at. And then if we can actually take that and understand the growth level and the positive business impact on our own business, and at the same time then help create jobs, help develop local communities by pushing out tech-related jobs into more distant areas than trying to get it all into those big tech hubs, I think that's a nice side effect.
I think that's such a wonderful and such a refreshing approach. And looking at the numbers, it obviously works as well. TimeXtender is an incredibly successful company. Where do you see you? Sorry, I was going to touch on something because you mentioned something that's quite important to me, which is about the lack of talent. And I know we've got Robin Huggins from MBN joining us later who's going to talk about that. But I think we're never going to train people to be good at Excel. Everyone's going to know how to use a little part of a spreadsheet, basically as a table. But if we can move, look at Airtable, look at the market they've taken by simply providing that. Now, this idea about the fact we want to use the talent we have in a much more effective way, do you think that's something that by rolling out solutions such as TimeXtender, you'll be able to help with that?
Absolutely, and I think we can prove it every day, because when we look at the quality of life of people, that comes that comes in many forms. I'm a firm believer that as work is a big component of what we do as human beings, and we do it because we want to, but also, of course, we need to have a house and shelter and food and take care of the family. So there's some basic needs that get solved by not hunting and farming, but going to work and get what you have pounds these days. So I do believe that if we can remove the kind of work that people actually, they do it, but they hate it.
Yeah.
It doesn't give them joy. It's this repetitive kind of work. People actually like to contribute. People like to see that they make a difference, that what they do actually made a difference. And it's easier to see that if you can see, okay, but I'm designing the flow of the data. I'm designing the presentation layer, the graphics. Instead of writing all this needed code to actually get all the data together, make sure we have governance and security and quality, and all that is important. But it's just that 80%, most people call it, 80% of the time people still use on getting to the data and trusting the data. Yeah, but it's not really giving you joy. And if you want to have a better life, you need to have joy in your work, and you need to have a joyful experience so that when you come back to your family, you're not pissed, right? You're joyful.
Yeah, it's such a great point, because I made a point at a presentation that I've never made any money in my life by understanding what a pivot table is in a spreadsheet. What does help me, though, is being able to get access to data, which can provide information, which leads to insight and then to action. And that's what, and also the skills that we can develop within our populations about problem solving. Everyone can do that. We can develop their skills. We could never train everyone to be a computer programmer or software developer, because that's too difficult. But the problem solving part enabled by well-designed technology, which provides empowerment for people, is the way to go. You know, Zoom's the perfect example, I think, in the last 18 months. So just before we invite in the panel, I was just going to ask you one question, which was about your future view of the market. So you've talked one point there about the fact that this geographical positioning of where we live may become less important. Are you seeing any other trends coming up over the next few years that you think could be important to our decision making?
Yeah, I think in general, you know, when you know, and it's kind of adding to the story where we live. I think that we will see much more distributed organizations. I have made TimeXtender a fully distributed organization, and of course, like any other company, we're still trying to figure it out. We haven't got all the answers at this point, but I do believe that having more instant access to data is absolutely going to be even more important in the future, because the moment that we are more distributed, I'm still a firm believer that people should meet. My teams should meet at least 4 times a year, because we have to remember the social. People do business with people, so we still have to remember the social. So it's finding the balance. But when we are not in the same office building, we are not running and with time zones, we also have to get rid of the normal notion of meetings. So a meeting with the purpose of informing anyone where we are, that has been, I just banned that in the entire company, because you can go online, we use Basecamp, you can use Teams, you know, Slack, people can do whatever to share, so that everybody is with full transparency up to date on what's going on. So we don't need a meeting for that. So people need to meet to make decisions or to socialize. But if you're not in the same room, having access online to much more information will be key, as I see it, for those decision meetings, because people will have to prepare, and that means that they need access to the information. So I think we will see, and on top of that, we will see that the teams that are going to implement these solutions might not also be in the same building anymore. So they will also be distributed. So the more we can add builder platforms for them to work on, to collaborate, and the more we can automate every workflow that we have, the easier we will make it for them.
And I think that's the world that we should all aspire to. There's some things that have come about for me through this new way of communication that we've all taken on board, which is using Microsoft Teams or using Zoom, etc., to communicate, which is, I think the insight into us as humans is much better. I think much more, if you and I were sitting down in our suits, Heine, in a meeting room in Seattle, we would have a very different conversation to get to this level of depth. I think we much more quickly get to a much more interesting conversation in this way. And I think the business card and the tie, the necktie and things like that, that kind of world's going to get left behind, because we're going to focus not on how we represent something, but on the result. The result is what matters.
Yeah, and the human connections, right? So I'm in a t-shirt and a hoodie 9 out of 9 days, right? Because there's no need. It's 10 years ago I got rid of the necktie, right? It's
and it's total. It's the world over as well, which is fantastic. So I thank you so much for that and providing that insight. Now we're now going to get joined by a panel of leading players within the Scottish technology scene who have a keen interest in data. So I will just ask if they could be brought into the room now. So the people at Cloud Cover IT, who are your representative in Scotland, are actually facilitating this. So they'll just bring them in, and then I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Fantastic. So, okay. So if I could, is that everyone here now? Excellent. So if I could ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So I'll start with Ray Bug, if I may.
Hello, very good evening, good afternoon, good morning, whenever this is going out to everybody. My name's Ray Bug. I'm the founder of Digit. Digit are the biggest organiser of stakeholder conferences for IT and digital leaders in Scotland. And in addition to that, we provide a news service to the IT and digital market with our 3 journalists churning out anywhere between 30 and 40 stories per week to anywhere between 30 to 40,000 unique readers per month.
Thank you, Ray. And if I could now turn to Liz.
Hi, everybody. Liz Henderson, Chief Data and Analytics Officer with a very long career in data. So mostly revolutionising organisations so data becomes an asset which they can drive value and operational efficiencies from.
Thank you very much, Liz. And then on to Robin.
Hi, Robin Huggins, Client Services Director for MBN Solutions. I'm a recruitment talent acquisition specialist with the data space. I also act as an advisor to a variety of different public sector and academic organisations on the subject of data talent.
Thank you very much, everyone. So the way this panel is going to work is I'm going to pose a question, and then I'll probably go to Heine first and then get the rest of you to comment on it. Now, I've got a favourite question in this session, which is about the subject we're discussing, because we all use the word data, but we all have a different definition of it. And the people who are running businesses who are watching this, I don't think they've got the same definition of data as we have. Is data the numbers I've got in the finance systems? Is it ones and zeros in binary code? Or is it all the paperwork I've got in the office? Or is it actually access to public data sets around the world? So if I could just ask this question about what we mean by data, and if I could start with you, Heine. So what's your take on what do we mean by data?
Well, I think we should look at it in a very broad perspective. I think that data is information, and information can come in structured form. It can come in unstructured form. I use the term everything that potentially possible would be relevant to the business. That is the data we should have interest in.
And that could mean video as much as it could mean text. Is that correct?
Yes, it could be any kind of video. I think data today comes in any form and any shape.
So could you maybe give us an example of some transformations you've seen by people understanding that piece about data? someone who's moved their business significantly forward through accessing and seeing the value in data?
I would see in general we see a good uptake on unstructured data, so that people actually start to understand that yes, we can get the bookkeeping numbers or the supply chain numbers, the warehouse numbers, as we have done for many or maybe 30 years, put them into a data warehouse. But today there's a lot of information that is in documents, right? So if you look at the cognitive analysis it's an area that I see is really making a difference. It can be used. The most significant areas I have experienced with cognitive data from text is actually in a support setting. So any company doing customer support actually can get a lot of information from going through the written emails and the communication that they have, both for internal training, but also to generate product marketing materials and write knowledge articles, etc. So I think we just need to open our horizon when we communicate to the business. Then I know that the data people within the companies, it gets slightly more complicated for them, but that's where we're here to help, right?
That's fantastic. So who would like to come in next on what we see as data?
Well, I think Liz is the expert here.
Definitely.
Thanks for passing the baton. Is it a hot potato or is it a nice baton?
No, I'm happy to have a go, but I think your perspective will be most welcome.
Well, actually, I was thinking along the same lines as Heine, because I was thinking it's information. It's everything that's in the organisation. What I was thinking, though, is how do we manage it? So I was just thinking an analogy while Heine was talking. I was thinking, is it like herding cats or is it like herding sheep? So I'm going to stick with that. It's like herding sheep, and then it's keeping those sheep shorn, so it's all nice and tidy. So there's my thought.
Or if you speak to a data leader that I know within one of the major banks, it's like pushing water uphill. I think there's various challenges. I think you're right. I think it's information. It's information. I think within the business which should be classed as an asset. I think the challenge that businesses have got now, and my knowledge on this is drawn from the words of others, not my own. I'm not a technologist. I'm not a data scientist. I'm an industry commentator. So we very much draw on the consensus and the opinion from the various IT leaders that we speak to. I think what businesses are now suffering from is they're holding a load of data they don't need. And the challenge they have is how they work out what they don't need. It's a bit like hoarding at the minute. I think businesses at the moment are hoarding, and a good example of that is a CIO from a major oil and gas company who, after a couple of beers, loosened up a little bit and said, I can't believe it. He said, we've had to go through the emails of people that left 10 years ago to see if we can throw them away or not. So that's the sort of challenges that are being put down to these people to get the best value from data, but they don't want to be looking at this old data. If data is old and it hasn't got a function, my perspective is get rid of it. We also had the head of HPC from CERN, from the Hadron Collider, speaking at one of our events, where he turned around and says, we chuck away 90% of our data annually. 90% of data that we accumulate within the Hadron Collider, and as you can imagine, there's a fair amount there. We get rid of it because we know we're not going to use it. It has no use. It has no value. And I think that is the intrinsic conundrum for a lot of businesses at the minute, is learning the true value from their data, but also getting rid of the data that has no value. Because obviously there's storage costs. If you look, there's storage costs, there's management costs, there's processing costs. Why are you processing nothing? So true value from data, I think, is the big challenge at the minute. And yes, data, information assets.
It's very interesting.
Thank you. I just come up with something there just as you were speaking there, and I'm going to throw this one in, but I kind of look at this just from what you said at the beginning there, Heine. My career began recruiting the individuals who data to them was our transactions at the EPOS terminal for a loyalty card. That was where I began 20 years ago. And now it's engineers that can design predictive analytics for complex engineering machinery. To echo your point, Heine, data is everything. It's everywhere. But to what Ray just said there, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant, because I think the challenge moving forward is everything that Ray said about deciding what we do and what we don't need. But more importantly, I think there's another factor we have to consider here, and it's around sustainability. I sat on an amazing webinar with a lead data scientist from an organisation called Forthpoint in Scotland, and what she spoke about was the environmental impact of running algorithms and models. And I love being on these webinars because it gives me an opportunity to quote Jurassic Park. You were too busy.
Okay.
Just because you should didn't mean you should. You know, just because your scientists were too busy concerned with what they could do, not what they should do. And I think we need to start thinking as a community about the environmental and sustainability impacts of, to Ray's point, the hoarders that have collected absolutely every single piece of data they ever could collect. And I think we need to start looking at what's data and what's insight, drawing a very clear distinction between the two, and looking to make sure that only insight is kept, because that's what's best for the future.
I've just deleted 40% of my company's data.
Top man, Ray.
40% of it gone. It's unengaged. They've either moved on, and the problem you have with marketing data is it doesn't always bounce to tell you that person doesn't receive that now, because a lot of catch-all servers are within organizations. So even if you get the email address wrong, it still absorbs. So we looked at our data. 40% of our data hadn't engaged with our content for the last 6 months. We deleted it.
Yeah.
They don't need us, we don't need them. That's the quid pro quo. That's how it works. And I think that businesses very soon are going to be called out for their sustainability within IT. Green IT was something that seemed to come as a topic and then go again. I think the government, UK government and Scottish government, were accountable for a lot of that. So we did start something called the Carbon Reduction Commitment Scheme, where businesses would be held accountable for their carbon intake. That would have pushed a lot of people up into the cloud. That would have got everybody off-prem. Thankfully, COVID's accelerated that now, so there's one good thing that's come out of it. But I think that this has got to be forced, and there has to be some sort of campaign or agreement within senior business leaders in big companies to turn around and say we're committing to get rid of X amount of our data, and being transparent with it.
But it actually goes back to yes, Liz.
Sorry, don't you remember GDPR? Retention policy.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd love to know what the retention policy is for that company that kept emails for more than 10 years, because I'm sure they're in breach of it. Yeah. So the mechanism's already there.
Yeah.
I absolutely get it, because I've worked with an IT team before, and they said, well, we can't delete it. We'll just find a place to store it and we'll hide it so nobody. Well, then why don't you delete it? Or we can't.
Yeah, that is actually wrong, Liz, right? We have, in most companies, they do a lot of things wrong. They do a lot of things good when they look at what their business is about, but when it comes to manage, the infrastructure, it's amazing what we see, right? I completely agree with Robin. We need to have an environmental approach. The cloud is going to help us. The big cloud vendors are going to enhance over the next 10 years how green and environmentally friendly the cloud is running. We have to do our part. I think it comes down to keeping the relevant part of data. Because if we just hoard everything, we shouldn't, right? We should keep the data that we need. We should never keep emails for 10 years. And there is actually, maybe I don't know any laws anywhere in the world that people have been able to present to me that it always an internal company policy that and what I tell my organization is it gravity? Because we haven't figured out to solve that problem yet. But anything else, we can actually decide on our own. We don't have to keep anything. We have to keep some bookkeeping data for 5 years in Denmark. Every country might have a different amount. But I can tell you that the day, that's also because of the tax people, right? The day that you hit your 5-year mark, every single company hit delete on the past year. We always keep, even on paper, get rid of it, because we don't need it anymore, and it becomes a liability to have all this old information. Could also be GDPR that is holding you back. Personally, I delete all my email within 90 days. And if I need to keep them, I give them a little mark, but the rest is just going out. And eventually, if you do proper email, going back to Ray, proper email management, I only get around 10 really important external emails a day.
God, I wish I did.
The rest, but I get a lot of emails, maybe 200, but they go straight into spam. I have so many rules that just delete it out, right? And then we don't have any internal emails. We communicate purely without emails internally.
Yeah.
So I get rid of all that CC and all that, and that saves a lot as well, right?
So there's an element not just of data storage and data usage, but it's also how it pins into the digital transformation process as well. And it's almost a cultural thing more so than an operational.
It is.
If I could come in there, because Heine made a very interesting point there, and it's about, I think we have to educate our teams, and particularly our young people, about the fact that not everything's important, and we have to make those decisions. So if we look at automation, and it could be rules within email, which push out so many messages. Some of the messages may go to someone else, but it's the only way to actually process everything through. I'm of an age where email works for me because I'm familiar to using it in a particular fashion. Whereas the one I struggle with is instant messaging like WhatsApp or Signal, etc. And I've got to, that's the one that I've not quite worked out how to deal with. So I possibly just ignore it. So I respond very slowly to WhatsApp messages. But I think that's a very important thing. And it's about this idea behind your company, Heine, about trying to return us the time. We have to take responsibility to learn the rules and then be brave enough to implement those rules so that we get our time back. Because I could spend all day doing email if I wanted to.
Yeah, I think you can take it one step further, Russell. I think you can take it to that you need to take control back on what you do during your day.
Yep.
And I think that is where email but also the data that we help collect and present to customers is not necessarily always a good thing, right? Because I'm very, I'm puzzled about, I live in US now most of my time, but I'm puzzled about the culture here sometimes, right? They have this busy, and then instead of solving, okay, how do I get fewer emails? Now the most hyped startup in Silicon Valley is Superhuman, which is an email management program. It runs your email, but it will help you schedule your email so that when I need to send you an email, Russell, I know when you work because it's actually tracking your behavior. That's a shit scary, right? But it does. And then the goal is that I want my email to get into the top of your inbox, hopefully at the right time, so it doesn't drown. Right? Yeah. But that whole notion is wrong because, and I tell everybody who wants to listen to me about, guys, take control of what you do. What do I need? What are the 3 things that I need to do today? It goes the same with meetings. I'm not succeeding as I want. I have my personal assistant knows I take maximum 2 meetings a day, and I only do meetings 3 days a week. The rest of it needs to be time. I talk to a lot of people, so that means that I have time to a lot of one-on-ones, and I have time to do what I have decided is important for today or for this week to get accomplished. And I think a lot of people, as you said, Russell, are getting disturbed by email, by instant messaging, by news updates and emails from social media, and 8 hours later, what did you do today? If you ask people, what did you actually accomplish today? Sometimes they just look at me and say, I have been so busy. Okay, fair enough. You've been busy and working hard. But what did you do?
You're describing me there, Heine. I actually feel like I'm
sorry.
I think this has been, this discussion is possibly the perfect example about how TimeXtender's approach to appoint local partners to understand different cultural behaviors in different parts of the world is a great approach.
Yeah.
So when we look at data, We've looked at the physical side of data, but I think the really intriguing part is the question. So getting the business to understand what question they want the data to answer. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that, about how we go about running our businesses so that we can ask the right questions.
I think now it starts to getting a little more difficult, right? Now, first of all, I actually think you have a in our industry relatively famous countryman, Donald Farmer, who is actually living here. You know, he's a good friend of us. He's living like 10 miles from where we are now. He actually years back said that, you know, we start to have the data people, the IT organization needs to be shopkeepers instead of gatekeepers, right? So he came with the idea that first what we need to do is we need to remove the barriers for the business to get access to the data. Again, we have our approach on how we think that should be done, but again, it can be done in many ways. It's a mindset. You know, how do we make sure that there's also this term data literacy. So we need to have a higher level of data literacy within the organization. Not sure exactly what it means in behavior, but it's, I think the idea and the direction is where we need to go. Because if we can make sure that all the relevant data, not all the data, but all the relevant data are available to the business, that it is to some extent documented to the business what this data is, and the business trust the quality of that data. If that is in place, and that's basically what we focus on, and that's also another reason to partner, is that the customer needs the mental, you know, change of mind. They need education. They need consultants to help them understand how to use the data and setting up the front end presentation layers. And as we are only doing the back end, the boring part, we remove the workload there. The partners deliver the full picture, right? But it is going to take a long time, I think, I'm afraid, before the business understand to and in bigger scale learn how to ask the right questions. Because like any other thing we're doing, a human being can only ask any type of question based on their experience, based on their perception of how the world is and what the context is. So if you have absolutely no idea, then you're not suddenly going to ask a crazy question, right? So it's I think it actually comes a lot with the next generations. I think that they are much more used to not accept that we don't know. They're used to search. They're used to dig deeper to get information than maybe previous generations are, because they're grown up with technology.
I'll ask Robin to come in a second, because Robin's worked a lot with this younger generation. But what you said just now absolutely aligns with my own experience of how I consume technology. So it was only when I started mentoring an 18-year-old who was driving an entrepreneurial business that when I traveled around the world with him and he said, oh, we should use Airbnb, oh, we should use Uber, that I started to use those technology solutions. My own peer group weren't doing that. And I think that education from the young and trying to work out the questions to ask based on the way they do search is great. So Robin, you've worked with, like, I think 3 or 4 years worth of the top data talent coming out of Scottish universities. What's your take on that subject about the question?
I love it. I think, well, I'm going to caveat that. I do think Heine makes a great point, but I think that there's another piece to this, and it's what I've seen working within academia has been a very world class. That's no bones about it. We've got some world class institutions based in Scotland producing some top tier data talent. However, they're working to a prescribed academic course that in almost every way has to compete on an international academic marketplace, so has to not necessarily serve the needs of industry, but it has to, you know, if you're University of Edinburgh, University of Glasgow, you're looking to attract an international student, so you're competing with universities all over the world, not necessarily serving the needs of organisations based in Scotland or organisations based worldwide. So there's that challenge firstly. Where I think an impact could be made is looking at if there are potentially three streams of where organisations generate talent from. The first stream we've covered there, it's the education stream. It's either academic institutions or it's specific industry courses delivered by private sector providers. Secondly, then the cross-training of individuals from, let's just say, left field choices, people who might have the necessary underlying propensity to learn the skills, but don't do a job anything like it, but we could train them up. But where I think the sweet spot lies somewhere in the middle. And I would use the example here of, for example, when the pandemic began, we had a lot of people within the travel and tourism industry who were put on furlough, and people who perhaps flew aircraft or were involved in the flying of aircraft, navigation, air traffic control people were put on furlough because aircraft weren't flying. Now, those people, to me, would right away have not only the necessary propensity to learn the skills of the data industry, but they've also got a completely different perspective. To Heine's point, they see things in a different way. They ask a different set of questions. They have a different worldview. They have a different life experience. And I think the answer to this particular problem is going to be solved by the organisations who take a very holistic approach to acquiring their talent. They don't put all their eggs in the academic basket. They don't put all their eggs in the left field basket, but they look to nurture different talent layers in order to engender from the start a wide and differing view, so that I'm always a great believer of, you know, you can't expect a question to be answered if the right people aren't in the room to answer it. We want as many different divergent opinions in the room as possible in terms of our talent to try and get these questions answered. It's my take anyway.
A great point. I completely agree. Diversity in any form is only a good thing. It helps on every single question, decision that needs to be done.
Liz or Ray, would you like to come in on this?
Yeah, obviously I've worked very closely with Robin and the NBN team over a number of years across a number of different initiatives with them, and have worked quite closely and reported on the activities they've done with the data talent and the MSc program as well, which has been hugely successful, and it's been great to see them leading on that for as long as they have, because they just win it year in, year out based on how well they've done the previous year, I'd like to think. I think one of the things that, and talking about diversity, it's one of the reasons I started the business. One of the reasons I started this business is because people who worked in IT and digital and banking were only going out for a drink and meeting up with people who worked in banking IT. People in oil and gas were only going for a curry with people who worked in oil and gas IT. And I had a vision of well, hang on a second, technology is changing, but technology 10, you know, even as a short time back as 10, 15 years ago, was still being produced and largely consumed by vertical industries. What we're now seeing is that there is very, very little being made for vertical industries, and those people that are making IT or software for vertical industries aren't faring very well, because there's so much good stuff off the shelf that's got great interoperability with other bits of software and other programs that are being used within the business, that I think it's creating a natural cross-pollination of sectors. And that's why I started doing what I did. I wanted to have government people talking to oil and gas and sharing notes. I wanted to banking people to speak to people in manufacturing and share notes. And that's really, I think, really brought Scotland on. That's not self-congratulatory, because all I've done is put the people in the room. They've done the rest. But I think, you know, and I think that the technology providers themselves, by being more holistic about their products and saying, this isn't just for oil and gas, this isn't just for manufacturing, this is for everyone. Let's push it out to everyone. And you saw a lot of the big IT providers like IBM and others, Cisco, actually taking away that vertical industry departmentalization of their sales structure and their service structure and saying, let's just do it by size of business, because they're all consuming our product in the same way. Why do we need to talk to them differently? So yeah, I think, yeah, I'm just agreeing with Heine, but in a different way.
I would add, Ray, that verticals can sometimes be important, because when we sold to a very big hospital in the state of New York, I was invited to be part of the closing of that deal, and I must say I had no clue what they were talking about. that doctor language with all the 3-letter acronyms, I was like sitting there for 2 hours, and I had absolutely no idea. The technology, I agree, is the same, but we will still need people who can speak a certain language.
Yeah, a lot of IT and digital startup companies will go for verticals because they have the legacy of a previous customer to bolster their presence in that particular marketplace. But what we're seeing more and more of now, and it's pretty much the norm, is it's one size fits all. You know, it can be white label, it can be shape shifted according to that particular industry, and it's a good thing.
Sorry, Ray, we've got a few minutes left. I just wondered, Liz, what's your take on this? Because you're sitting in the middle managing all this data within these large companies.
Indeed, I'm agreeing with some of the things that I'm hearing from both Ray and Robin. So from Ray, I completely agree. It has to be across sector. The best ideas are now coming for generating value when you look at what other sectors are doing and how they're generating value, and then you're taking those ideas from the hospitality industry or the airline industry and putting them into a different industry to generate that value, and it's really working well. Picking up on what Robin was saying about the education side, I worked with a company very recently that was using startups to problem solve because they wanted to change the culture within the organisation. And they were using their network of startup organisations to say, okay, come and teach my people how you work in a startup and how you accelerate getting to the solution of a problem before we currently do, and how we can teach our people. But what I also do is use data business partners and data translators. They bridge the gap between the business and the analytics. So you've got that bridge that helps people understand and sort of create stories out of what's going on, so everybody speaks the same language.
Wonderful. Well summed up there, Liz, as well. And I love that idea about thinking differently by looking into the mind of things like startups. So it's been great to hear this. I hope we've given Heine a little bit of a feeling for Scotland. But just before we finish this, so we have we're very fortunate in Glasgow, where Cloud Cover are based, that we will be hosting the climate summit for the UN in November, and Scotland's got a very strong understanding about the need to become more sustainable, to look after our planet. We're the first country in the world to declare the climate emergency. And I just wonder, just to finish here, Heine, where you thought this idea about saving time could actually help us towards a greener and a safer planet going forward. That's a big question for you to end with.
No, but I think it actually all makes sense. I think it all comes together, because if we can save time, if we can get out of busy, first of all, a lot of people will have the bandwidth, the mental bandwidth to actually rethink some of the things we are doing. I also think that the change of perception on what work is just the fact that I'm not driving down the office. We do have a satellite office down the road. I don't go there, right? We can always discuss if we should have electrical cars, and that transformation is coming. I'm not saying my children are completely agreeing that I need an EV next time, but can you delay 3 years that? We still need that noisy thing. But I do believe that if we save time and we get out of busy, we get more time to focus on what's happening around us, and that actually will give us more time to on the small things, more time to actually cook real food, so that we can skip a lot of the environmental issues we have with food production and food distribution, maybe from farm to table. I think having more mental time will help us all make small changes that aggregated will have a decent, at least, impact.
I think that is a fantastic message to finish on. So I'd like to thank Heine for joining us, Robin, Liz, Ray, and the team at Cloud Cover IT for making this possible. I'm Russell Dalgleish of Scottish Business Network, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, everyone.